Hello, everybody. I'm pleased to moderate this roundtable. My name is Florent Souillot, and I would like to introduce the topic that we're going to be discussing before I leave the floor to the different speakers. So we're going to talk at what's between the author and the reader, so the two ends of the digital chain, as understood in the description that Ron provided in the different commercial players in digital books and distribution. So EDRLab, of course, can concern all of these people today. So thinking about this roundtable, I was saying that the bookshop and the distributor had objectives that were not necessarily the same, but that were complementary in terms of structuring the chain for the digital book. The distributor likes standardization. The distributor needs standardization. More he has, the more publishers he has, the more bookshops he has, the more he justifies his role and the services he provides. On the other hand, and without being in opposition, in fact, the bookshop is trying to establish his market position, to develop his platform. So he's not immediately concerned by or directly concerned by standardization. So these two objectives today are the conditions met to achieve these objectives for both professions? Well, the first answer is visibly no. We will see in the different markets that we're going to be describing the sale of digital books outside integrated operators is at most 20% of the turnover, and often it's very low, as low as zero. So today, are we just reduced to being a platform and being only a go-between towards the filter bubble that we saw earlier in the previous presentation? So it's urgent to act together collectively and to show that these topics are being addressed by the different stakeholders. So just a couple of points on the trends that I've observed in the digital book market. The first trend is integration of functions. So distributors and bookshops are professions. So digital technologies are new arrivals. They come in with the promise of technology, and they correspond to this general promise to do away with go-betweens, with intermediaries. So you have operators that are platforms, that are service providers, that provide reading material, reading software, bookshop services as well. The other trend I see as well is concentration. Well, we've talked about this quite a lot already. So the fact that the marketplace will concentrate all the work through commercial dumping, through innovation annuities, as it were, and to the detriment almost of standardization. So in fact, there's a standardization on the market. There's a concentration on the market, and also an integration of professions. So EDRLab wants to integrate the commercial aspect, but also the standardization aspect. So this is a very strong challenge, and it shows that today one of the major challenges for us is to reconcile these two aspects, to show that there's no ambiguity between commercial objectives and standardization from a technical viewpoint. So interoperability is at the heart of the EDRLab charter. That is what links its partners. Yesterday we were talking about LCP. We see that it includes the functions of the bookshop, architecture provider, and so development needs to be balanced. We mustn't be in a centralized system where we have the final user, a technical go-between, where the bookshop doesn't see the final client and is only in charge, the end user, and is only in charge of dealing with issues related to customer service. In any case, your presence today proves that you're aware of these issues. Here we also have a commercial objective, and in that sense, EDRLab is supported both by distributors and by bookshops, as shown by the support of the Cercle de la Librairie in the foundation of EDRLab. So I would just like to introduce all of the speakers here who will be able to talk about the different markets in which they act. So Jean-Philippe Bougie, who works at Marque, who's the lead developer of the Canadian company Marque, the technical operator for distribution. which provides solutions for different distributors in Canada, in Italy, in Spain, and in France. And he's also the co-author of the specification, the LCP specification that we may talk about later. Bente Franck-Saetervoll from Bokbasen, who is in charge of operations at Bokbasen, the main distributor of audiobooks and digital books in Norway, and who's a member of the Readium board, and who represents Readium on the EDRLab board. Francesca Noia, who manages publisher relations at Edigita in Italy, a distributor platform. We also have bookshops represented here today. So Philippe Goffe, who is the founder of the graffiti bookshop in Waterloo in Belgium, and he's responsible for the Librairie.be platform. He's also the president of the AILF, which is the International Association of French-speaking bookshops. And Denis, of course, I don't need to introduce him to you. We've been here with him for 2 days now. He is the managing director of Librairie Mollat and the president of the Circle of Librarians, who also worked on the creation of EDRLab. So I suggest that we start with Bente, because she's going to have to leave us a bit early. So let's start by asking Bente and Jean-Philippe where they stand in the work they've done on standardization and how these developments are being integrated into their timeline, their schedule.
I guess I'll start. Maybe just a couple of words to begin with about Bokbasen and who we are and what we do. So Bokbasen is the main Norwegian ebook distributor. When I say main, that means we're about 100% of the market. It's convenient to be in a small market. So pretty much all of our ebooks that we distribute are in the EPUB format. We have a few titles in PDF, but it's insignificant. We have titles both in EPUB 2 and EPUB 3 and support, of course, both formats for our distribution. What's different with the Norwegian market is that we have more than 90% of our books being distributed with the watermarking. So there's hardly any hard DRM in use for Norwegian titles. However, since Norwegians also prefer reading in English and do that a lot, then we do operate the content server. So we have Adobe Content Server hard DRM on all the English titles that we distribute. Amazon is hardly present in Norway with regards to sale of Norwegian titles, simply because they don't have the titles in their catalog, because the publishers have required that they get them from Bokbasen, that they use us as a distributor, and they don't want to do that for the moment. And the reason for that is actually a rather unique situation that we have in Norway, and which is very much in line with as you mentioned, Monsieur Georges yesterday, talking about how you don't want to be locked in the store to read your book. And this is really a philosophy that we are following in Norway as much as we can, so that Bokbasen distributes the ebooks directly to the end customer. The retailer sells the book, but they give us information about which customer has bought which book, and we distribute the ebook directly to the end customer, which means that we maintain a directory of all, or a database of all purchases on each single end user. Whether you bought the book through retailer A, B, C, D, E, or F, or as many as you'd like, you keep one common bookshelf for that individual in our databases. And all retailers are required to write to that database, but they're not required to get information back, that they can choose themselves whether they want in their own apps to show all the purchases, all the purchased ebooks of that single user, or if they only want to show the ebooks that were bought in their store. However, obviously, they all choose to show everything, because as soon as there is one retailer showing everything, the consumer will prefer that retailer. And so that means that all retailers in Norway will show all that customers' ebooks in their apps, regardless of where that ebook was bought. And this is the policy that's keeping Amazon out of the market, because they, of course, for the moment, refuse to write back the purchases to our database. on a consumer level. So I think when it comes to, and I forgot to mention that we use OPDS as the means of communicating back those customers' bookshelves to the retailers. So that's also a standard that we use. And I think all in all, on the question of how important standards are to us, I think they are the alpha and the omega of our business. Without them, we would have too much complexity, and the cost would obviously be sky high. So yes, that is very important to us, and that's also why obviously we support idpf, the Readium, and EDRLab.
Okay. I'm going to talk a bit about the Marque. The Marque is first a technological partner and also a distributor. So we work with different partners in various markets in France, in Italy, in Spain, and of course in our native Quebec. We also do direct distributions in Quebec, and we have a second product that's completely on the other side of the equation, where we work with public libraries to let patrons lend and access ebooks, either in Quebec or in France. In Quebec, we have a large part of the market. So we work in the very various markets in which we're not as lucky as Norway to have a single unified way of doing things. So we work with social DRM in Quebec. We work a lot with different kinds of DRMs everywhere. And of course, in the library use case, we also had to do right now we have to do ACS4, but we hope, well, and I hope as writer of the LCP spec that we can use different alternative DRMs to fulfill those library needs. Of course, as technological partner, that's where we work with. We're not publishers ourselves. We work with publishers. We work with other distributors, and we hope that technology and the standard themselves will free them to access new options. We want to make the technology as painless as possible so that they can use their expertise to reach new markets, to find different ways of marketing their books or selling their books under different pricing models, under different access models. And that's how I think standards come into play. They provide the small bricks, the paving stones where you can build onto and use your expertise as publishers, as booksellers, to know your audience and reach that audience in new and exciting ways.
So just before you were talking about libraries. We'll talk more about libraries later. It could be an alternative for integrated operators, because we're talking about integrated operators. But Francesca, you also have something to say about your market in Italy as person in charge of the distribution platform in Italy. So what is your view of this matter today in your market?
Sorry, I made it way. Well, from a technical point of view, we rely on the Marque technology. We decided not to write our own technology, being such a small market. So technically, we trust the Marque decision to start with standards. At the moment, the ebook market in Italy started around 2010, in a moment where paper books on the internet were about 10% of the total sales of the trade market. So we didn't have really strong e-retailers in the market. So in only 3 years, the big players, such as Amazon, Apple, Kobo, and Google, in Italy reached 95% of the market. Now, it has its pros, because when we look at figures, we see that Italy is growing pretty fast. And it has its cons, because big players, well, we are supposed to have a long tail in digital, which is actually pretty short with big retailers. So what we see in our future is going through vertical sales, vertical retailers, and mostly direct sales from the publisher. So from this point of view, we need the Marque to do the technical integration and trusting standard. And from commercial point of view, we need standards to establish a common ground and make the business model less expensive to manage.
Okay, well, now I'm turning towards the booksellers. Now, in comparison with the situation we have in France, could you tell us about what's been happening in Lab? And also, as a bookseller, does that mean you need to work on those standards? Yes, I think so. I totally agree. And the interest of our bookshop for the Readium project is totally obvious. And so it's about the equivalent of the Botten Verein, the German Botten Verein. It's a circle which dates back to Waldeck-Rousseau from 1874. It was a kind of trade union in those days. And so the SAC had an economic activity at the end of the 19th century as it managed the French database and then Electra. And so the circle is an interprofessional association which became immediately interested in Readium because as long as we can work on those standards, there's also part of ADNIL which gives those ISBN codes for France. The circle also become involved in the law Rodiel, which is works that are still unavailable, that no longer exist as a paper material, but which rights are still valid. And Elect invited 1.6 million euros, and which allowed to develop in partnership with the French National Library to intervene. And the SAC is also in an agency for the registering of writers. For DONIX, we translated the ONIX standard in France, and we are involved in everything relating to standards and make things operational. And that is, in fact, the basis of this defines how most of our trade works. Now, as a bookseller, so what our idea of how books are? So we start from the work itself, let's say creation, and when there's creation, there's one, and we have to build an economic system around it. So, of course, the paper book dates back to Gutenberg a long time ago, and then digital books appeared. And even if I have a choice, paper or digital book, and so the client, it will be the final user, will make the final decision. But what is essential is to allow them the best possible quality of service. And our idea is very simple. So we have a very broad selection of books here in Bordeaux. Downstairs, we've got 180,000 books and 12 miles of bookshelves. And in terms of reference, of course, this is extremely complicated. So we've got 55 members of staff trained at graduates who've done graduate studies and even beyond. And so we have to associate the starting point, that to say the contents, and we've built a whole model around this, and this is something that will be able to transfer via the web, for example. So we have a website which is a bit old now, it's 15 years old, which doesn't referenced in search engines, but we had a second website for public buyers. And on our 120th anniversary, we're going to have a new website that will allow to disseminate a lot of information. So we must be visible by the number of books sold, but that is not sufficient. So some time ago, we tried to establish on the web what happened in this room here. And so every year, we welcome some 240 writers per year, and we started making recordings of their interviews. And for example, if we used to have, those very old tapes, and Le Clésier, who was not yet a Nobel Prize then, and so it was very interesting when he was speaking about his book La Quarantaine about Bordeaux, and so this became systematic. So we started making some podcasts out of that. So we added the sound and image. We shoot video clips with the authors. We have a permanent correspondent in Paris if authors don't come here. So also some live interviews. And some time ago, we realized that as members of Argus de la Presse, that was a company was quoting us as a boom marketing. So we didn't even know what that was. And in fact, and so this is what we're doing, a viral marketing with a lot of metadata associated with authors, writers, the titles of their books, and then the search engines see us, and this creates just like a funnel type of a screening of the information, and these people turn into prospects and who become customers. So that is always the same idea. Let's work as much as possible for books, for to promote our authors' books. You have raised the question of intermediation, and if some authors want to contact their writers directly, of course there have been some major cases of authors who worked without intermediaries, but they managed to reach their audience. Everything is possible now, of course, without intermediaries. Of course, we would no longer need publishers or booksellers or literary critics or even librarians, in fact. But why not? This is possible. You were talking about referencing. I think Philippe wants to make a comment about that specific point, about French speaking booksellers in Belgium. I've only got 43,000 references in my bookshop, but I came here to speak more about my work, which consists in associating as many booksellers as possible. So we started this portal on the edges of the Ministry of Culture in Brussels, and which gathers 30 booksellers from the French-speaking part of the countries. Because, as you know, we've got a Dutch-speaking market, and but the practices, even in marketing terms, are very different. And we gather some 30 bookshops, and some of them you may know is the Tropisch bookshop, which is the biggest of our members. And gathering 30 booksellers is a bit complicated because there's a lot of work of mediation, also of convincing people to reach and to come to the network. Of course, I'm not an expert in digital publishing, but I've been looking at the issue the other way around. So we have the reader who wants to adopt digital books, and there's also the question of those small booksellers who don't make so much business on digital books. And for example, my bookshop is not at all visible on the internet, so we gathered and we created a common brand, which is Librairie. .org, and we've also realized that entering the e-book market is something costly. So instead of reinventing the wheel, so we outsourced that service and we established a collaboration contract. And so we've written some very clear, precise specification, and this service company is called ePaging, and we're extremely satisfied because we have a permanent dialogue with that service company to promote our portal and the products on it. Well, beyond those technological and also financial difficulties, there's also another difficulty, is being recognized as a group of booksellers. The French-speaking market in Belgium is very small, just like the Norwegian market, where we represent 4.5 million inhabitants. That's about the same thing in Norway. But in Norway, what is different is that you sell a lot of books in English. In France, of course, our support market is the French market. So, of course, we also sell books in English, in Dutch, but it's not as many. And so we have this difficulty of being recognized as an association of librarians, and we now have a common brand. But still, we offer every bookseller the possibility. For example, if you tick here on this, the Belgian flag, you have the map of our booksellers on our map, and we have some 30 members. And of course, if it's difficult for booksellers to enter this digital publishing culture, this is difficult as well for readers. And we're suffering a lot from DRM as they now exist, because there are many French finds that depend on DRM Adobe, and there's a lot of pedagogy to be done towards our readers, our customers, and this is why we're extremely happy to have integrated e-paging in our consortium, and we have very high expectations about this DRM. E-paging is promising. So we are looking forward to it within the next 6 months, because there is a real problem and a real danger is that people may drop us. We entered the e-culture when it's not really mature, and we're suffering a lot from a lack of interest by some customers who say, well, this doesn't work, this is not what we're expecting, and things could be much simpler. There's also this question of international cooperation, but I just would like also to point out two concerns for us, not directly linked to Iridia, but the non-homogeneity of VAT rates on e-publishing. I underline the courage of France, which has adopted the same VAT rate on e-books and paper books. Even this goes against European standards. But we, Belgium, we sell French digital files, and we have a VAT of 11%. So you see, our margin is extremely limited, and those VAT issues are very damaging to us. Another point is working on the territory, and I may come back to this later. And the last point I would like to express before finishing my presentation, we are on work in progress, and so we're also looking at what is being done in order to merge or to make e-paging and book sellers closer. So we must be extremely strong in a very competitive market, even if we are at the end of the process, because we're talking about very small or medium-sized sales points which are not so strong individually, unless they're all gathered. Yes, you were speaking about libraries. As publishers, we find that libraries are developing sales channels, and we've got some very interesting growth rates in very short periods, and on book lending. And Jean-Philippe, Bente, you also work with public authorities. Can you tell us about the Canadian experience? Yes, books lending in culture is an important way for people to access culture, to give people the opportunity to read books, but also for people to learn about digital culture, for people who may not have a good access to digital culture. And libraries in Canada, in Quebec, are making huge effort to teach people, to learn people, and to follow up, for example, with older users or the very young ones who are not used to technology. And of course, this is difficult to start with, but these people may have even more restriction. But the library can introduce these people and take them to other sales points and take them to make them become consumers and members of the complex ecosystems. And digital lending in libraries works really well. The staff is extremely pleased, and libraries are buying a lot of titles, and we see there's a lot of reading. Out of a population of 7 or 8 million users, we've had more than 2 million e-books being lent, and this is growing regularly. And so we have also excellent feedback from the users in the libraries, because these people declare themselves extremely satisfied by the offer and the access they have to the material. So it's not by totally disconnecting the library from the users, but people will also, those interactions will take place in the library itself, and this has been extremely productive in our country. And other intermediaries, so you have service providers, booksellers. How does that work? In Quebec, we have a law on paper books by which a purchase by a library must be done by an agreed bookseller. And so, of course, there's legislation about the content between Canadian and French. There's no real digital law, but the chain functions exactly the same as for paper books. So you would have a library buying from a bookseller of their choice. They will buy one or several titles, and these are directly connected and sent to the library to be borrowed by the users. And on the model, but mostly under lending, on a lending system. And these books or those files can be PDF files, are in the hands of the users, and we take care of everything relating to DRM, the contracts, and the management of simultaneity. So you're also investors in PNB, but also distributors. You also work on the technical organization of technical lending in libraries. Can you also tell us about your experience, Denis? Yes, we used to be one of the first members of the PNP project, which I think was an excellent starting point, but which has changed a bit over time. And so we've also had having the same management system for large audience files and files for library. We need extremely light systems that are very easy to implement. What other offers could be alternatives for operatives? In France, we have a very regulated sector, so your digital stakeholders, which levers have you identified to work on this system? It's a more general question I'm asking here. Well, this is probably, the most difficult work to be done. After what I've heard here today and yesterday, there are many jobs to be carried out, many projects, and they're all very interesting. But my issue as a bookseller is to find the link, the connection between my work, my activity of paper bookseller and what is happening now. There is a great amount of innovation in digital publishing, which we don't see yet reaching the consumers. In Belgium, we've created a partnership with PRN of digital and book partnership, and Morgan is a representative here, and they organize a lot of meetings, a lot of training courses about digital publishing. We see many companies creating many new products, but we don't have any clue on how these products can be interesting for us as booksellers. And so I think, this will have to be developed, of course, in collaboration with our service providers, because there is huge creativity, but we don't know how to make both things meet. So this is a real challenge. Another concern about PNB, because this preserved the book selling chain. The system comes from Canada. It's well adapted for the French-speaking market and for the Belgian French-speaking market, which is a bit connex, as I said, but this is a major advantage. And we sometimes see with a little worry the pure players arriving there that say those sellers who are not paper booksellers, but they can also appearing on the landscape. This is something we wish to point out. So, but in the future, it's always the same port. So it's kind of like of an obsession for me. Well, it's that I think from my point of view, what is important is the way to value creation, because with digital, you'll be able to also to go to how to find the information, going to in connection with social links, finding the title with the writer's title, the book itself, and to take people to read either paper book or digital book, where everything is standardized and where we have a standard. For example, imagine if in music we didn't have MP3, but many standards, so you would need a new, device every time to be able to listen to music. Well, here we haven't yet made that connection between reading and music, and this would people would never accept that concerning music. But that is the situation we are now in the book system. Now, if you look at what about your markets that are quite different from the French markets in terms of regulation? You have a specific framework. So, what business model can?
Well, I think in the case of libraries, in Norway at least, I think that LCP might be a solution to a problem that the retailers have currently, because for printed books, it's the retailers that or the booksellers who sell the books to the libraries. So it's very distributed, the sales to the libraries. Whereas for ebooks currently, because there is no good form of standard solution, the publishers are selling the ebooks directly to the libraries, and they're selling it through one joint purchasing organization for the libraries who have a proprietary app with a proprietary DRM. So obviously right now there's been a monopoly created for the library market, and that's a concern both for the publishers obviously, but especially for the booksellers who are now shut out of that market. So I think for Norway, LCP would be used for the library market, and that's also why we're supporting the development. Whereas for the commercial market, I think it's less relevant for us, unless of course suddenly all the English language publishers should choose to accept LCP as an alternative to ACS.
Well, for Italy, the library market is actually pretty small. We need intermediaries, service provider for libraries. They're all currently working with Adobe DRM. And one of the reasons they think that digital lending is not working so much in Italy is that libraries think that managing the customer support with Adobe DRM it's too costly for them. They are not prepared, and there are no courses, and they are constantly under budget, and there are always budget cuts in Italy. So any other easier solution for another DRM capable to manage loans will be very welcome in Italy. Also, we have a huge problem of piracy. It's a phenomenon that we monitor a lot in Italy as well, and so we might need something stronger, maybe for other business models outside the libraries, probably in B2B or universities or communities. We might need two DRM solutions, one easier for the libraries and one more complex for some other business model.
What about you, Jean-Philippe? We were talking about DRM, but how do you evaluate the fact that the Italian model has been that the model has been developed around Adobe? How do you think transition will be able to develop between these two models, Adobe and LCP? I think we won't have any choice for several years. I don't think we won't be able to have a hybrid model because users are not prepared. People will want to use the form systems, and we must respect that choice, the reader's choice to have his own device, his own application, and we'll have to keep that system still for a while. But of course, people in the in libraries in Quebec are scared about the cost that may be connected to business DRM, and they fear that LCP may not be sufficient to solve, well, to calm all their fears by allowing the free use of DRM, and they're always scared of having to be under a single standard and no longer having the possibility to refer to all these books in a sustainable way. So one of the partnership of libraries in Quebec are national archives which gather and collect all this information, but they're still very afraid that we may stop our activities and that all their purchases and everything they have bought may stop from a day to the next. And this is why other standards must develop and that we must operate a fast but also smooth and mixed transition. I think there's still some time left for questions. We have raised many issues, so you may have questions about what has just been said. Okay. So Philippe would like to say something about the territory. As we said, I'm the coordinator of an association that gathers all booksellers of French-speaking booksellers that was created in Paris in 2002, and we have booksellers from the 5 continents, of course from French-speaking countries, from Europe. We have some other countries, of course, but mostly Africa, Black Africa, from Maghreb, the Near East, where the situation is disastrous, but we still have also some French publishers in booksellers in South America. And the major concern is the arrival of digital publishing and this territorial division, of course, and the problems of territories. For paper books, it's very easy to send them, even if there's a cost for transport, but digital books are affected by those territory rights. And these booksellers over the planet fear, and they may no longer have access to all this material. So what we want to make sure is to guarantee access to those books to those different countries, and also in all the network of French cultural centers, just like Alliance Française, all this network. From our point of view as booksellers, when we look at the digital market, we find there are many obstacles to be beaten. Yes, I would like, about the availability of digital book. Yes, I would like to speak about this abroad. This also relates to our overseas territories, because some of them may have difficulty having access to digital books. We're extremely aware of this problem in the national syndicate of e-publishers, and in order to try and address this issue, to find solution and to keep moving forward, because we think it would be totally all nonsense not being able to make digital books available overseas. This would be totally counterproductive. We've asked a BF study that was delivered a few weeks ago to have an overview of the situation in order to identify the situation. We know it's not only a matter of patents, rights, but there's a whole stack of issues, and we've wanted, in fact, to quantify and identify all those issues, which is not a final document in this, which is a good basis to start our work, and we hope our national syndicate, as well as all the other stakeholders from the whole system, are going to use, and we definitely wish to work and to progress on that matter, in that matter. Yes, so if there are no other questions, so we thank you all for this very productive morning session.